Welcome to Blooms and Stitches by Anne-Marie. Thank you for listening to my audiobook, From Jamaica, A Journey from Jamaica to Becoming. If you haven't subscribed to my channel as yet, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And please leave a comment under this video to tell me how you feel about what you've been listening to so far. Thank you. When protection isn't safe. Children who feel protected do not usually go searching for safety in dangerous places. And by my early teens, I already knew what it felt like to be unwanted, uncertain, and afraid. The man my sisters claimed was my father rejected me. My real father was absent. My mother and I loved each other awkwardly through wounds neither of us yet understood. Hanging over us was a constant fear that the overseer would force us out of our room with nowhere to go. Survival has a way of reshaping what comfort looked like. So, when I first saw him standing on that corner, I did not understand how much that moment would change my life. I saw relief. The little girl who lived in the larger section of the yard was overjoyed when her mother and her siblings arrived from America to visit. They came unannounced, and even then, I believe they did so unintentionally, wanting to see for themselves whether she was truly being cared for properly by the overseer and his wife. They arrived while my mother was out selling peanuts. Certain that their visit would somehow end with us being thrown out that very night, I locked myself into our one room and began cleaning frantically. I swept the veranda repeatedly and wiped down every surface until it shone. Though my mother prepared her peanut both inside and outside of the room or on the veranda, she was relentless about cleanliness. Since the day the overseer had kicked off our door, we had become even more meticulous, careful not to give him any excuse to physically remove us before the final notice had expired. From inside the room, I could hear excitement spilling through the yard, loud laughter mixed with bright American accented voices. I remembered wishing my father was visiting too. I wanted someone arriving just for me, someone bringing joy instead of just fear. Looking back now, life had also dealt that little girl a difficult hand. Her siblings, mother, and grandparents all live in America, while she remained behind in Jamaica under the care of strangers. Even as a child, I wondered what that must have felt like for her. Still, as I listened to her laughter echoed through the yard, I remember thinking, well, she certainly doesn't feel the way I do right now. Regardless of this, fear twisted my stomach violently that I developed diarrhea almost immediately. I was convinced that because they were the real owners of the property, they could call the police and force us out without warning. The only option would have been to move in with my aunt. And though I love my cousins, they were much older than I was, and I did not want to leave my new friends in Raytown. I was also afraid of my aunt. You see, she was slightly softer than my mother, but only slightly. Worse still was her husband. He was a colorist who openly favored light skinned people. He would often say directly to me, anything too black, no good. Even as a child, I understood exactly what he meant. The fear of the unknown tightened itself around my stomach, sending me running back and forth to the bathroom throughout the evening. My mother came home later than usual that evening. She had been sitting at the gate with one of our neighbors, a gossiping stationery vendor whose small stall sat at the front of her yard. I could not stand that woman. She fed community gossip to my mother, who constantly absorbed every word the woman said. Her latest theory was that the overseer was using Obia and my mother, causing the sores on her feet to flare up again. When I overheard my mother repeating this to my aunt, I nearly sighed with relief when my aunt dismissed the idea entirely. Most evenings, my mother would sit by the woman's stall talking for hours. Some nights, I did not mind because I was allowed to stay up longer reading my romance novels before bed. But that night felt so different. Even after the gossiping neighbor packed up her stall and went inside, my mother remained sitting outside alone. It was then that I wondered if my mother was carrying the same fear that I was. The room suddenly felt unbearably hot. As I rose to turn off the light, my mother walked through the doorway. I looked at her and she looked so anxious. Them come? She asked softly, the question sounding heavier than the words themselves. Yes, Mummy, I answered. Me here are just the mother and our pitney them, my mother said. I don't know, Mummy, I repeated quietly. She sighed deeply and told me to get ready for bed because I had school the next morning. By then, I had a small twin bed pushed into one corner while my mother still slept on her old bed beside mine. The tiny room could barely fit both beds, and the small dining table with its two remaining chairs sat in one corner. In another corner sat the kerosene stove that we cook on, and the third chair had long since broken and been discarded. After bathing, my mother carefully put everything back into its proper place before turning in for the night. Sleep did not come easily that night. You see, laughter and excitement was still floating from the larger section of the house down to us, but we were so anxious for what we thought was to come. Their part of the house was four bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, and it felt worlds away from our cramped one room with little space in it. During the school week, their doors was usually shut by 8 o'clock, but that night, all the doors remained open, alive with voices and movement. At some point in that night, I drifted off to sleep, but I was suddenly shaken awake by my mother. Come sleep beside me, she whispered in my ear. Still groggy, I stumbled from my bed in confusion. That was when I noticed the American woman and her children standing inside our tiny room. My heart suddenly began racing. What was this? I thought in my mind. Through sleepy eyes, I watched my mother strip the sheets from my bed and replace them with clean ones. The woman protested softly, telling my mother not to bother to change the sheet, but my mother was insisting. Within minutes, the woman and her children climbed into my bed to sleep. I remember standing there dazed, wondering if I was dreaming before, going back into my mother's bed to sleep. Looking back now, I believe that night changed something inside me. Despite the stress, humiliation, and cruelty the overseer had put us through, the moment another human being needed help, my mother didn't hesitate. She had the opportunity to tell the rightful property owners how badly we had been treated, but she never did. Instead, she offered them food, shelter, and dignity without asking for anything in return. It was one of the first moments in my life when I truly began seeing my mother not simply as a hard woman, but as someone capable of deep compassion, even while suffering herself. What the overseer had failed to consider was that one of the beds in the larger house was infested with bed bugs. During the night, the American woman's children were bitten repeatedly. With nowhere else to go, my mother offered them our room to sleep in. That single act of kindness saved us from homelessness a second time. It also taught me something I would carry for the rest of my life. Even at your lowest, you must never lose your humanity. That was a lesson I kept with me throughout my life. Life continued after the American family to returned home, but their visit humbled the overseer. He was instructed to allow us to remain as long as we continued paying our rent. He was also reprimanded for his behavior. The owners made it clear that his wife, not him, had been hired to oversee the property and care for the little girl. In retaliation, his wife threatened to quit her responsibilities entirely if her husband was no longer allowed authority over the yard. At the time, I viewed her as weak and spineless. As an adult, I now understand that she was not powerless at all. She enabled him through all of this. After the owners returned to America, very little changed except that we no longer face immediate eviction from our one room. Suddenly, the overseer smiled at my mother more often. He even invited me to watch television in their living room. I refused every time. The memory of what he had done never left me. His wife occasionally offered me food as well. While I politely declined, she would sometimes quietly place a plate on our table and say, "You can eat it later." The sudden kindness unsettled me more than the cruelty had. The American woman left my mother a phone number before returning home and told her that if we needed help, we could contact either her or her friend who lived at the end of our street. My mother rarely spoke about it, but I could tell that having that option comforted her deeply. Then fate intervened a second time, or so I thought. My father appeared. This was the first time I'm seeing him in person. He had never responded to the letter I'd written him, yet suddenly he stood before me as if he had materialized out of thin air. I stared at him in awe. He looked immaculate, clean, polished, almost unreal. His deep American accent filled the tiny room. Beside him stood a blonde haired Caucasian woman he introduced as his wife. When he did so, my mother repeated, "Wife?" Her eyes widened in surprise. The woman wore a white dress covered in blue tiny flowers that matched her eyes perfectly. I could not stop staring at her. You see, outside of my school teachers and the nuns that taught us at my high school, I'd never been this close to an actual white person before. To me, my father looked rich. He smelled like tourists. I just couldn't explain what that means. But he did. He dressed like one too. Even his car outside seemed glamorous. He brought clothes and a doll, a blonde Cabbage Patch doll that looked strangely similar to his wife. I stared at that doll for the longest time. There had once been a period in my childhood when I desperately wanted a doll. Yet now, almost 14 years old and secretly reading explicit novels, receiving my first doll felt strangely out of place. Even more confusing were the clothes they brought me. The underwear was sheer and lacy, the kind I'd only encountered in my romance book. My mother bought practical cotton underwear in plain colors that stretched almost to my navel. And standing there examining the delicate fabric, I understood one thing clearly. Whoever brought these things did not know me at all. I felt both excited and deeply sad. The outfits included crop tops that exposed the stomach and bottoms my mother would never allow me to wear until I grew into them. So I sat quietly while the adults spoke around me, feeling invisible in my own story. The room felt smaller and hotter by the minute, and at one point I silently wished both women would leave so I could speak to my father alone. The moment never came. After about an hour, he and his wife exit. They left. I was so sad, I was disappointed. He explained that he was returning to America the following day after traveling from St. Anne's to find me. He explained also that he had been trying to call us for quite a while, but the number that he had gotten was lost, or maybe was mixed up. I didn't believe him. He gave me his phone number and told me to call him collect whenever I wanted to speak to him, and then he disappeared again. I would not see that man for another 3 years. Communication with my father was what slowly led me back inside the overseer's house again. They were the only ones in the yard with a telephone, and my mother had asked if we could use a telephone to make collect calls to my dad in the US. He lived in Miami, and we needed to keep in touch to see if he could help financially with me going to school. To my surprise, the overseer and his wife agreed. And then sometimes Daddy even called himself. I look forward to those calls. Still, every time as I step into their living room, my body stiffened. I felt mechanical, almost detached from myself as I spoke into the receiver with the overseer sitting only a few feet away from me or lingering silently in his bedroom. It was as if he was listening to what I was saying to my father, and he made my skin crawl. By then, he had started to smile at me again. That same smile that never quite reached his ugly eyes. I wished desperately for a phone of my own in our own little room. I wanted to tell my father everything, but we were only just beginning to get to know each other, and with the overseer always nearby, fear sealed my mouth shut. One Saturday, my mother was at the market. I sat alone at the front of the yard when the overseer called out to me. Your dad is on the phone to you, he said, motioning inside the house. Excited and without thinking about it, I just wanted to hear from my dad. I jumped up and immediately hurried inside his house. But the moment I entered the living room, something felt wrong. The telephone receiver was still resting on its hook. I was deceived. I turned around to him. I was confused. And he said, Your father not call you. Calmly, he said. I me want talk to you. Every muscle inside me tightened. What was this? I was thinking. He stared at me without smiling, and suddenly I felt like I was going to wet myself. You vexed with me? He asked. No, no, I answered quickly. I lied. I was terrified. I was terrified that if I admitted the truth, it would anger him, and I still did not know what he was capable of. I saw just a glimpse of what he did before, and I did not want to repeat that. I remember that the little girl was somewhere in the house that day, but when I glanced around, I could not see her at all. Without breaking eye contact, he pulled out his wallet, counted out $10, and held the money towards me. Take this, he said. I don't need any money, I replied quietly. But he insisted. Then he stepped towards me. Instinctively, I moved around the dining table that sat in the middle of the room, keeping it between us like a shield. For the first time, he looked amused. One, he said with a small laugh. You can't run forever. See the door there? Go on for now. He was telling me that I can't run forever and I should go. The second he moved aside, I rushed outside of the house without looking back and went straight onto the street. Outside, I struggled to breathe. I felt as though invisible hands was wrapping itself around my throat. Why me? I screamed silently inside my head. Then I suddenly felt a hand gently touch my back. Startled, I turned around and came face to face with Scrappy, Mr. Handsome as I call him inside my mind. He smiled, revealing slightly overlapping teeth that somehow only made him more attractive in my eyes. "You all right?" he asked again softly. His voice pulled me back into the moment. "Yes," I answered automatically. "Me see you run out of the yard fast and wonder if you're all right," he said. I told him I was fine, but he kept studying me for a brief moment before speaking again. "Just remember Samedea if you need me," he said. "Okay," I answered quietly. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous it can be when fear and relief arrived at the same time. Because in that moment, after feeling trapped, cornered, and afraid inside that house, Scrappy did not feel dangerous to me at all. He felt safe. Our interaction after that did not escalate immediately. He would smile at me often or wave, and I would return his greetings. I had never seen him around before then, but I soon learned exactly why. Before then, he had spent several years in the nearby General Penitentiary on murder and gun related charges. Instead of being alarmed or afraid, I was enthralled. I became intensely curious about him and soaked up every piece of gossip I heard. He had a large family living nearby and appeared to have a good relationship with all of them. Mr. Ansom always wore a welcoming smile that seems to glisten in his eyes. He was slender with such a youthful face that he could easily have been mistaken for 17 years old. When I learned that he was 10 years older than me, I was shocked, but it did nothing to lessen my interest in him. He was popular with the corner boys and seemed equally comfortable with the older people in the community, even the ones who loved to gossip. To top it off, he was always clean and presentable. In my teenage mind, those were all signs that he was a good person to know. I liked him and thought that he was handsome, but I also listened carefully to the stories surrounding him. Stories about how cunning he was and how he disarmed a high ranking law enforcement officer and had stolen their firearm, and how he fought alongside the cornermen during political tensions between Southside and Raytown, and also how he was supposedly second in command to the area's gang leader. None of what I heard deterred me. The overseer had returned to his old ways, pinching me and offering me money in exchange for tolerating his sexual advances. After the owner left, he and his wife became increasingly friendly with my mother, eager to smooth over previous tension between them. That false peace stripped away the little sense of protection I thought I had from the abuse he could inflict. My father was millions of miles away in another country, and I could not confide in him. I still did not feel comfortable telling my mother, and at the time, speaking to teachers or guidance counselors about abuse was out of the question. The focus of schools in the early 1990s in Jamaica was generally education, which excluded conversations around these type of abuse. Schools were only just beginning to incorporate material supports for students, while families could not afford basic necessities. Psychological support and counseling was not readily available, and most children growing up in inner city Kingston, Jamaica, at the time were encouraged to not chat them business to anyone, especially not to teachers. I urgently need some form of protection. Mr. Ansom was not only good looking, but he also had influence within the community. He was feared by everyone, even by some law enforcement officers. Knowing all of this, it still did not stop me from wanting to speak to him. You see, when a child is deprived of protection, protection itself can become very seductive. One day, my mother decided she was going to go to a boys and girls school championship at the National Stadium. She thought that that would be the place where she could sell her peanuts and make a good profit. She opted to bring me along and told me to wear an outfit that my father had brought from abroad. When I put on the outfit, I could see that my navel was peeking underneath the midriff top, and the skirt rested a couple of inches above my knees. I thought nothing of it, but as I stepped out the room, the overseer's wife cackled loudly. I thought in my head. She said, "Wait there! You're a big woman now. Hips and breasts and body are push out." I immediately became self-conscious, but said nothing. Throughout the day, I received a lot of attention from the boys and a couple of compliments from some of the young schoolgirls. Mommy decided to keep me close by her side when she heard this. When I came home, I stood in front of the mirror that we had and stared at myself in amazement. I thought, the woman was right. I had curves, curves that I hadn't noticed before, curves like the women in my romance novels. I chuckled to myself. I didn't know what to do with that realization, but beneath my confusion was a growing awareness that I could attract the same attention from boys that some of my older friends was receiving already. And though I didn't fully understand any of it, my immediate thought was, what would Mr. Handsome think of me in this outfit? Would it encourage him to speak to me more? I did not immediately take off my clothes because I wanted to find out. I was determined that he would see me, so I would study his reaction. Mommy was outside gossiping with that next door neighbor. Oh my word. So I decided to sashay my overripe self outside too. Just as I was about to shut the door, I could hear my mother coming up behind me saying, "Don't go any further, Miss Lady. Stay right here, sir, and I'll make 9 o'clock catch you at the gate." That meant I should not venture any further than the yard gate. I was disheartened, but I still believe I had a chance if he happened to pass by. "Yes, Mummy," I responded. It was then that I noticed a flicker of light and looked across the road to the yard opposite to ours, the spot where he usually stood smoking with his friend. He was there, alone, lighting his spliff. His teeth glistened as he looked directly at me and flashed a smile. I smiled back and, for no reason at all, giggled stupidly. By then, Mommy had already gone back inside. I watched as he stepped out through the gate, and for one quick moment, I thought he was going to come over and speak to me. But instead, he simply walked past me. I was disappointed. I wish he had stopped and said something. But then, as he passed me, he looked over and he said, "You look good, man." He threw me one of his charming smiles. "Thanks," I responded. "You too." I couldn't believe I said that. I was so brave, but the bravery was short lived because the second he passed, I turned around and ran straight back into the yard, far too giddy to say anything else. That night, I fell asleep on an emotional high. Nothing could break my happiness. A few days after that, I was hanging out with my next door neighbors, and there were three sisters, with the youngest only a year older than I was. The second eldest one asked me if I knew him. I casually answered that I had and that I had seen him around, but I didn't divulge anything else to them. She smirked. "Him like you off, you know? Him tell me to tell you say him like you," meaning that he told her to pass along the message that he really liked me. My brain immediately went into overdrive. What? He liked me? He liked little old me? I could barely believe it. The younger sister then chimed in. "Him the big man for Hannah. Hannah, how old he is?" I responded that I was going to be 15 in a few days. And for some reason, everybody stopped talking. The room fell silent. Then the elder sister snapped at the other little ones. "You'll have set up people. Leave him make him look at himself before you hear say you set him up on her." Meaning, they should butt out of him wanting to be involved with me. Towards the end of the day, the youngest sister handed me a box food, a tin of supplement, and $40. I looked at the things alarmed. The sister said, him say forgive you that. I didn't have to ask who she meant, but I was confused. I'd ask any of this from him, and I said to her quietly, but me never ask him for nothing. You know what, did she ask? Me can't take it, you know? Meaning that if I didn't want the items that he sent to me, that she would take it. I took that offering and walked away. This was a second man outside of my father to offer me things I did not ask for. One offering had been completely and deeply unwanted. The other left me uncertain about what, if anything, would eventually be expected in return. The next day, I saw him while walking to the shop. He asked me if I'd received the things that he sent, and I thanked him politely for them. Then he asked what form I was in school, and I told him. He did not react to my age or school year. Instead, he asked if it was okay for him to speak to me whenever he saw me. I told him yes. He said he will speak to me over my friend's yard because he didn't like people being in his business and that would be private. I acknowledged that and I said yes, he could. That was how we began speaking. My happiness, however, was short lived because the overseer's wife eventually saw her speaking at the gate one evening. Later that day, while I sat beside my mother on the veranda, she brought it up. Now, send me I get into your business, Miss Reed. But I immediately knew what that meant. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach because that sentence almost always meant she was absolutely about to get into someone's business. She told my mother that she had seen me talking to Mr. Ansom and that she needed to speak to me about the company I kept in Raytown. She described him as a bad man and far too old for me. She warned mommy that she should not allow me to be harboring bad man at our gate. I was shocked. I was not harboring anyone. I had simply been speaking to him, and the conversations themselves felt innocent enough. Most of what we spoke about was school and his own experience attending school when he was younger. He never pushed sexual conversations onto me, and from time to time, he would slip a little money into my hand, which helped me more than he probably realized given my mother's financial struggles. My mother said nothing in front of the overseer's wife, but once we were alone in our room, she spoke to me quietly. Anne, may I beg you for Christ's sake, not take up no boyfriend now, please. Concentrate upon school. Man can come after. You see how me I struggle with you? Your father barely help. How you think it would have feel for you get pregnant now? I felt tears strung my eyes. Pregnant? Why would she even say that? But mommy, ma only talk to him. I only talk, you know. I protested softly. She answered firmly. I did saw it first start. I did not bother to argue with mommy any further. Even though she was not beating me often these days, I still feared her discipline. More than anything else, I felt as though I disappointed her terribly by just speaking to another boy. And I disliked the overseer's wife even more. Still, the conversation did not stop me from speaking to Mr. Handsome. It only meant that I became more careful about how and when I did speak to him. One day, while I was inside my room, I heard my mother calling out to him. Alarmed, I rushed to peek through the front window. What I witnessed showed me another side of my mother again. Her tone was firm but respectful. I didn't think that my mother was afraid of him, but she understood what he was capable of. I heard her explain that I was her last child and that she wanted the best for me. She told him she did not want me getting pregnant and dropping out of school, and she was asking him to respect that. Not say a word, not say, he replied, trying to calm my mother and saying she didn't have to worry. Miss Reed, she corrected him. She was trying to instill respect even in that conversation. Then she continued calmly. If you see me coming, you not have to run off and act like you do something for make me suspicious. If I only talk you talking toward, then why you run? But you need to respect me as a mother, okay, sir? Okay, Miss Reed, he answered. My heart leapt with joy. While Mommy certainly was not approving of him as a boyfriend, I interpreted the conversation differently. In my young mind, it felt as though she was setting boundaries, just in case he intended something more serious. Years later, I would come to understand that things could have gone very differently had my mother approached that situation another way. The overseer was still being touchy-feely with me whenever he got a chance. Around that same time, I was stepping into my own womanhood and beginning to have vivid dreams of Mr. Ansem and me wrapped in heated embraces. The romance novels I constantly devoured only intensified both my daydreams and my nighttime fantasies. At the same time, the overseer's advances sometimes made me hate my own body. The more pronounced my curves became, the more he commented on them, and he would grope me openly, even in front of his wife, who behaved as though she saw absolutely nothing. I was reaching the end of my rope one day when he pinched me on my nipples hard while they were especially sensitive. The pain and the humiliation overwhelmed me. I fled the yard and I stood at the gate fighting back tears. Mr. Handsome noticed immediately and walked over. After gently pressing me to tell him what was wrong, I finally broke down and told him everything the overseer had been doing to me since I was nearly 13 years old. For some reason, he didn't seem shocked. He said, "Then me not hear say the same thing him do to him daughter, man." Meaning that he heard that the overseer was doing the same thing to his daughter. I sniffled through tears and I corrected him. "It's not him daughter, that was his stepdaughter." He grunted in understanding, and in that moment I felt as though I was speaking to the father I desperately needed. He pulled a rag from his back pocket and handed it to me. "No make nobody see her cry. Me I go page him for you, alright?" I looked up quickly, panic immediately rising in my chest, because I did not know exactly what he meant by he was going to page the overseer. "No," I said hurriedly. "You can't tell nobody. I'm going to give you notice again if you tell them." He looked directly at me. He said, "No worry about it. Me just a go talk to him. Me not do him nothing. Me not tell nobody. Anything you tell me, our secret, you know. No fret about it be." Hearing these words filled me with relief, because that meant that he wouldn't tell anybody, but he would deal with the overseer in his own way. In that moment, I felt safe. I felt like I finally found someone I could trust. I felt like he was my hero, and I smiled weakly and whispered, "Thanks." He smiled back, and he said, "From now on, you are my girlfriend. Hear that? No worry about nothing. Me gonna take care of you, and nobody can do you nothing, alright?" I agreed, happily. The atmosphere in the yard changed significantly from that day. For some strange reason, the overseer seemed angry about something, but he barely looked at me anymore after that. His wife also stopped speaking directly to me and kept her conversation strictly between herself and Mommy. Around the same time, my father had stopped calling or returning my calls, but strangely, that no longer hurt the way it did. Mr. Ansome eventually brought me to the small room he occupied in the back of his family yard. The bed looked no better than my mother. In fact, it looked worse. And when it rained, water leaked through the roof that he lived in, but I overlooked all of that. At that stage, he never initiated intimacy, and none of that mattered. Instead, he insisted that I attended school every day, stay off the road, and only socialize with girls from my high school. Sometimes he would even bring lunch to school for me. On those occasions, my classmate would ooh and ah over my big man boyfriend, who had somehow managed to bribe the school security guards into delivering food or small gifts to me during the day. My cousin, who was a cosmetologist, often did my hair to look extra nice for high school, and I would pay her from money that he gave me. By then, I was in fourth form, and his insistence that I stay focused on school was beginning to reflect in my grades. For the first time in a long time, my report card was showing several A's and B's, and my mother could not be happier. My mother, though, continued to warn me about Mr. Handsome, but her warnings floated straight over my head. Years later, after I crossed water and had time to sit with it, I finally learned the words for what was happening to girls like me in Jamaica inner city communities. We didn't call it grooming. We said someone was looking out for me. In a place where hunger was real and loud, attention could feel like shelter. Lunch money could feel like love. Protection could feel like a blessing. Back then, this was what I knew. An older man, feared, spoken about in low tones, treated with a kind of respect that was really caution, made sure I ate. He put fear in my hand so I could get to school. He made sure I could walk certain lanes without being bothered. And when another man who was doing things to me that were unwanted and unwelcome, that older man's watchfulness didn't feel like danger. It felt like a rescue. That is what scarcity does. It teaches you to confuse relief with safety. It did for me. By 17, Mr. Anson wasn't a secret to anyone. He was my full time boyfriend. He was my provider. He stepped into the empty space my father left behind. When he showed up, people got careful. A yard could be full of noise one minute, then his presence would thin it out. When his name came up, voices dropped. I shifted. A few people tried to warn me, not with plain words. Plain words could cause problems, but with careful sentences that never finish. I took these warnings straight back to him, repeated them to prove that I was loyal. After that, everybody learned to avoid the topic around me. I never asked where his money came from. I didn't want the truth to spoil the little comfort I had. I only heard the whispers that he sold a little weed, which was marijuana, that he ran things, that his money in his pocket was way too much for the small hustle he had. He was on probation for one of his charges, and when court time came around, my inside would knot up. I kept imagining them taking him back, probation gone, police at the gate, and then it would be just me again, exposed. I would beg to go to court with him. He said I was too young. He said that they wouldn't let me into the courtroom without parental consent. Then he lowered his voice and told me that his family was working on something so that the victims wouldn't show up to court. I told myself that that was mercy. I prayed they wouldn't show up to court either. I held on to him like he was my only lifeline, and in my mind, the future was already written. We would have a big family, a house to match, happiness, and finally, we would have our happily ever after. But that happily ever after I kept dreaming about was something I pointed to in the distance. Real life was already moving. Mr. Ansem started talking about making us proper. He didn't want just kisses on my veranda anymore. He didn't want the stolen rush ones that left me feeling grown and foolish at the same time. He wanted to go all the way, and I didn't resist it. I needed to say that plain. I didn't fight him. Not because I wanted what he wanted in any clean, equal way, but because I learned to measure love by what I could give up. I had learned that when a man chose you, you held on tight and tried not to ask too much questions. Years later, I had to look back at that girl and tell the truth. I welcomed his insistence. I told myself it meant I was chosen. I told myself it meant that I was finally safe. I didn't know that yes, my quiet, trusting yes, was the start of a different kind of story. And it would take me years to find my way back to myself. Thank you for listening to Chapter 7 in my book, A Journey from Jamaica to Becoming. If you haven't already done so, please remember to subscribe to my channel, hit that post notification bell, give me a thumbs up, and leave a comment if you like what you heard or you want to give some suggestion. Thank you again from Blooms and Stitches by Anne Marie. Until I see you in the next one.